Thank you very much for joining our climate and energy webinar series, Climate Change Track Number 1, Prospects for U.S. Climate Policy in the Biden Administration despite your very busy schedule. And my name is Tamura. After Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga declared in October last year that Japan will go carbon neutral by 2050, there has been an increasing level of interest on decarbonization in the general public. Reading the Nihon Keizai Shimbun, carbon neutral, decarbonization, the news on those are reported almost every day. And I have a feeling, I sometimes mistaken it as an environmental-related newspaper. So, against this backdrop, more and more companies and local governments are finding measures to decarbonize themselves. And in this webinar series, we will provide up-to-date information that will provide insights to create future visions or strategies to those who are engaged in the environmental measures. Now, today, we are bringing this live from IGES headquarters office in Hayama Town in Kanagawa Prefecture. IGES office is located in an area called Shonan Village, where research facilities are concentrated. And as you can see, it is a great day in Hayama today. Maybe it's a little bit hard to see, but we are surrounded by rich green. And this webinar is aimed to make the audience feel closer to IGES and IGES researchers. And so we came out of the conference room and we are taking this informal and accessible dialogue style with the office in backdrop. This is a new casual style for us, and we hope you like it. Now, for this memorable first installment in this webinar series, Mark Elder, he will explain about the climate policies of the Biden administration of the United States, which the entire world is focusing on. And we do have simultaneous interpretation between Japanese and English, so please select the language that you wish to hear with the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen. And the slides for today's presentation are available at the link sent to you by email beforehand. The presentation today will be open to the public on our website and YouTube after the seminar is over. And after the seminar, we will send you a request on questionnaire. And so we'd like to ask for your cooperation on this. Without further ado, let's kick off.
Good afternoon. I'm very glad to have you today. You have recently published a briefing note on Biden's climate policy, which was translated in Japanese. So I believe that most of today's audience had a chance to read it. But you know, the U.S. politics is very complex, and also your briefing note was a bit long. So could you summarize the Biden climate policy concisely?
Sure. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And yes, I can summarize it concisely.
Thank you.
Actually, in one slide.
Okay, that's great.
I made. Okay, here it is. So, yeah, first of all, overall, I have an optimistic view on Biden's policy. And in terms of the main elements, there are two main elements, I think, so far. First is a large infrastructure budget based on government spending, so jobs.
Yeah.
And the second one is regulation. And they're going to make quite a few of them. Of course, there's also like research and providing information and assessments. But probably the carbon tax or emissions trading will not be part of the policy anytime soon, anyway. And then in terms of the level of ambition, I think it's going to be reasonably high and more ambitious than President Obama, anyway. And they set a goal of net zero by 2050, as well as 100% carbon-free power by 2035. And they're planning real policies. It's not just a symbolic declaration. And of course, the big question in the US is, can these policy proposals be adopted? And actually, again, I'm optimistic. I think they will be adopted, especially like regulations or budgets or research. The administration, they can do on their own. But like the carbon trading, maybe carbon pricing or emissions trading would be difficult.
Okay. But in the past, there have been a lot of obstacles to more ambitious climate policy in the United States. So why are you so optimistic now? And what's different?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think one difference is that President Biden is prioritizing climate. It was in his first day series of executive orders.
Right.
And he set out a whole of government approach, meaning that all the government departments and agencies should align their daily work with climate change. And they also set up a White House management system with a domestic climate policy coordinator, Gina McCarthy, the former EPA administrator. And then for international policy coordination, he appointed former Secretary of State John Kerry, and they have good-sized staff at White House, and so they can easily coordinate all of the climate policy. And they also established a national climate task force, which has most of the cabinet members as well as all of the president's top advisors. So they're all going to be mobilized. But, and then another key point, I think, which is different from before, is that before climate policy was like siloed. There was a climate policy and then there was other policies. But this time, the key economy and energy-related cabinet secretaries and agency heads all have either some prior climate-related experience or they're anyway advocating a much stronger climate policy. And this was not the case before. In case, you know, some of the economic advisors, even in Democratic administrations, were either like neutral or not really supportive. But like especially significant is Treasury Secretary Yellen. Is setting up a climate task force in the Treasury Department. She supports carbon pricing, and also Energy Secretary Granholm is governor of Michigan. She promoted renewable energy in her state. Interior Secretary Holland is an opponent of fracking, although she's going to support Biden's policy. But so there's a big change here. And also, as you mentioned, American policy is very complicated. So I should explain a little bit about different kinds of policies. So we all know, like law, like basically the policy is made of law, except that in the United States it's very difficult to pass laws now because the Senate needs a majority of 60. And so in other words, the Democrats would need 10 Republican senators, which is not realistic. So President Biden is going to rely on the other kinds of policies, which are, he has more influence over. And so the first one is budgets. And of course, the budget is also a kind of law, except that in the Senate, the budget can be passed with a special procedure called budget reconciliation, which means the Democrats can pass it with just the simple majority. And so that's one. And then the second one is regulations. And these are based on laws which give the agencies the authority to issue regulation, like the Clean Power Act authorize EPA to make air pollution regulations. And this one takes a while, maybe at least 1 or 2 years usually, because they have to follow a lot of procedures like getting public comment. But anyway, they don't need congressional approval for this. They can do this by themselves. And then finally, what we saw in the news at the beginning was the executive orders. And President Trump used a lot of these, and they sound very impressive, but actually they are not very strong legally, and they only apply to the executive branch. And the president usually uses those just to set up the internal procedures and set their priorities. So Biden used his to prioritize climate change. But anyway, by using these types of President Biden will be. Maybe I should explain a little bit about the early executive orders. So these are the domestic ones.
Okay.
Again, a lot of it was organizational measures, but like right from the start, he canceled President Trump's executive orders and issued orders for starting the development of the new regulations. And also all departments are supposed to look at their budgets in order to use government procurement to promote more climate-friendly purchasing. And they also prioritized environmental justice. And then this is a few of the early, the international elements of the executive orders, which I think maybe are of big interest here in Japan. And again, it mentioned that climate is now a national security priority, and the Defense Department is going to work on it. U.S. will get re-engaged globally. The U.S. rejoined the Paris Agreement, and then, actually just this morning, the news, Bloomberg was speculating that now that they're talking about 50% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions based on 2005 in 2050. So that's so they're talking about that already. And there's going to be a climate leaders summit. They're going to develop a climate finance plan for developing countries, as well as an Amazon protection plan. And actually, I think those are due to be finished maybe soon, in the next week or two. And they also plan to promote the ending of international financing of fossil fuels, as well as seeking Senate ratification of the Kigali Amendment.
Okay, so it is interesting to see the executive order on climate finance for developing countries, which have huge implication for Japan. And is the Biden administration planning to end international finance of all carbon-intensive fossil fuel-based energy, let alone coal?
Well, that's a good question, and we don't have too much information, but that's actually what's written in the executive order. So that's the policy. I guess the key issue maybe is what is the timeline? So maybe some fossil fuels, the funding may be phased out faster than others.
I see.
Perhaps.
Okay, thanks. So I have another question. So have there been any major new development since you wrote the briefing note?
Yes, there was a big one. In fact, last week, the Biden administration announced their new jobs and infrastructure plan. And I know for you and I, we consider this is Biden's climate plan.
Right.
But if you notice the title, climate is not in the title.
Okay.
It's called the American Jobs Plan. It's about, and that's actually Biden's basic policy on climate. He wants to give everybody the idea that climate equals jobs.
I see.
And and working on climate is going to create jobs. I think that's the big message. And it's a big plan. It's $2.3 trillion over 8 years, about 1% of GDP per year. But I analyzed the climate-related element is basically, I mean, directly related is only about 25%. And if you consider indirectly related, maybe it's up to 50%, depending on how you interpret it. But it's really aimed to create a lot of jobs, and probably they're aiming to finish it by summer. And then they're going to have another human infrastructure bill. This will be maybe more about jobs rather than maybe won't have so much climate. This is the one with the climate in it. So yeah, let me explain the budget allocation. And this is the directly related. And so it has a lot of money, especially on transport and clean energy. So they're going to support electric vehicles, public transport, rail, upgrading the grid. This is really important, as well as clean energy manufacturing and climate R&D, research and development. So especially notable is that the clean energy tax credit for is going to be extended by 10 years. This will really help renewable energy a lot. And then they're also going to get rid of the tax advantages for fossil fuels. So this will help a lot. And then for the fossil fuel workers who may be losing their jobs, they have they're proposing $16 billion for cleaning up abandoned oil wells and methane leaks and coal mines. So I think this will create a lot of jobs. And they're going to create a civilian climate corps as well. So they're really thinking about jobs in specific places for people who were involved in fossil fuels. So now if we look at maybe the more indirectly related ones, I mean, one of the interesting ones I think is that there are a lot of items here that are not really related to climate change, but they're providing jobs in sectors which are maybe less carbon intensive. And the big one here is home community care for senior citizens and the disabled. They're proposing a huge amount of money, $400 billion for it. And so I think this is really designed to give political support for the climate issues. And then other parts of it are more traditionally infrastructure related, like buildings and infrastructure. So they have they're going to repair or build a lot of buildings, like schools, veterans hospitals, community colleges, and these have to have they have to be more efficient. Right. So this building efficiency is a major climate element for mitigation. And then another element like water systems and airports and ports, again, they're not really related to climate change. This is more related to adaptation. So these have to be resilient to climate change. So it's a kind of adaptation funding. So yeah, again, if you look at the summary, about 25% is maybe directly related, and then probably maybe 50% is indirectly related. So it's a big it's a big deal, I think.
So yeah, it is interesting to see the highlight on the so-called less carbon intensive activities. So does this mean that the Biden administration is seeking to changes in the U.S. industrial structure? Is it promoting low carbon intensive sectors?
Yes, that's certainly part of the intention to promote more manufacturing, especially in these low carbon industries. But it's more than that. They want to make, they're aiming for a broader shift to make the economy work for people, for ordinary people. And so that's why you see this emphasis on like home health care jobs. And they also are promoting labor unions. So all these jobs, like each element of the plants is it should be like people should have access to join a union.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. So Yeah, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about the funding for this plan, and which is always a difficult issue. But basically, they're going to fund it, they're proposing to fund it through corporation tax increases, and also reducing the ability of corporations to escape tax through their overseas activities. And also ending the tax preferences for fossil fuels, as well as stronger enforcement. So, I mean, it's not a carbon tax, but I mean, on the other hand, again, this is like a jobs and infrastructure plan. So, I mean, you don't promote a carbon tax for infrastructure, you should corporate taxes for infrastructure. I think that's what they're thinking.
Okay, but do you really think that Congress will agree with Biden's this huge stimulus plan?
Well, I think, I mean, they may have some revisions to it, and they may reduce the tax increase a bit, but, and it's possible they won't be able to get any Republicans for it, but they'll, in that case, they will use the budget reconciliation procedure. And I think it will pass. I mean, the big question is some of these conservative Democratic senators, like Senator Manchin from West Virginia, which, and West Virginia is a big coal producer, so they're worried about a lot of this. But really, this infrastructure plan is about spending money and creating jobs. And if you look at all of these elements, West Virginia is going to get a lot of money.
I see.
From this bill. It's good. If this bill passes, it's going to be like Christmas in West Virginia. So I really don't see how Senator Manchin can oppose this. I mean, he's going to complain a lot, and he will be a tough negotiator. But in the end, I think he won't give up all this funding for West Virginia.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting.
Yeah. So maybe I should talk a little bit about the regulation part quickly. So we don't really have details about the regulations, but like in all these areas, I think we can expect regulations. So electric power plant emissions, auto emissions, efficiency standards, air pollution standards. They've talked about methane. They're going to have methane standards, volatile organic compounds, as well as regulations for the grid. They're going to raise the social cost of carbon, and that will provide scientific and cost-benefit support for their regulations. And in terms of the timeline, again, usually these take like 1 or 2 years. A couple of days ago, EPA Administrator Regan told Bloomberg News that he's going to, for the ones under EPA, he's going to propose them by July. So like on automobiles, as well as the power plants. So I think we can expect these regulations within a year, probably.
Okay. Yeah, but this regarding the regulation, as you mentioned that at the presidency campaign, Biden proposed to make power sector carbon free by 2035. It's really ambitious target. So could you explain a bit the current status of power sector emission standards?
Okay, so I think you're asking me about like what happened to Obama's clean power plan.
And also could you tell us how Biden tried to achieve such ambitious goal of carbon-free power sector by 2035?
Okay, yeah, sure. So President Obama's clean power plan was tied up in court for a long time, as you know, but eventually it was just replaced by the Trump's new regulation. It was called ACE, and which had a much lower standard. And that one was thrown out by the District of Columbia Court in January, very recently. So the Biden administration will be able to start from the clean slate. And I certainly expect the new regulation will be much stronger than the clean power plan. But actually, I think, you know, the power companies are already shifting to renewable energy. And it's because the renewable energy is cheaper now. So there's no reason for them not to do it. I mean, the regulations will speed things up, certainly, but they're already shifting. And the regulations will speed this up. So the EPA will have a regulation. But in addition to that, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, has jurisdiction over the interstate transmission lines. And this is, and they'll need to improve the regulations in this area as well, because that's the weak part is the grid. And a lot of states are experimenting with renewable energy promotion policies. And under Trump, the FERC was disrupting them and delaying them. But now the regulatory situation will change. So these will be able to make much more progress at the state and local level with the support of regulators. And finally, as I mentioned, the infrastructure plan has a lot of money for grid improvement. So with all this, I think the U.S. should make a very huge progress on that. So yeah, let me turn to like one more element of the regulation, which is finance. And so in the U.S., there are a lot of different financial regulators, but now they're all unified around the principle of studying the climate-related financial risks, and they're going to have regulations on the financial disclosure related to climate. And then just, I think this morning, again, there was news that the Biden administration said these regulations, they're going to be mandatory, not voluntary.
I see.
So, so the Treasury Department, their Financial Stability Oversight Council is going to work on these. The Securities and Exchange Commission will regulate the companies. And interesting, even the Federal Reserve Board, which is majority Republican, even they're on board with this, and they just joined a new international group of central banks on climate change. So yeah, actually, that's my next slide is that they're going to cooperate on this internationally as well. So the Treasury Department is going to join these international discussions at the G7 and G20, and there will be more international cooperation on this financial disclosure.
Right.
So I'd like to maybe make a couple more points about the carbon tax, which, as I mentioned, is not really likely, although some important members of the administration support it, like Treasury Secretary Yellen. But it's also important to note that now the business community is starting to support the carbon tax. And a couple of weeks ago, even more surprisingly, it was the American Petroleum Institute now is supporting an economy-wide carbon tax. Maybe this enables more, actually more fossil fuel production. But anyway, this is a positive development. So there could be some movement on this in the future, but maybe not right away, I think. Also, I know our Japanese audience is maybe very interested in this issue of carbon border adjustment. So I'll say a few words about that. And they haven't said, actually the administration has not said anything publicly about this, but they discussed it a lot in their campaign plan. And I have to say the policies so far have been following the campaign plan pretty closely. So I think it's important to pay attention to this. I think they won't take it up soon, maybe next year, I think. I think they'll wait to see what the European Union does with their carbon border adjustment. And what they're talking about, I mean, it's maybe not going to be linked directly to greenhouse gas emissions, but it may be linked to the Paris Agreement commitments. So in other words, countries that are not meeting their Paris Agreement obligations, or maybe their plan isn't ambitious enough, then maybe we'll be subject to this, but if they do it, it will probably be based on the existing trade law, and President Biden will be able to do this unilaterally. So if they do it, but yeah, anyway, maybe next year.
Right.
We'll see what happens at the COP agreement. So, so I think now I'm reaching my conclusion here. So again, just to summarize, I think President Biden's policy is reasonably ambitious, especially compared to the past presidents. It's not entirely clear if it will achieve net zero, but anyway, and I think but the policies are very strategic and very important, and particularly, I think, in the electric power sector, the grid upgrading is really critical.
Yeah.
And also, I think the infrastructure plan is very important for building political support in general. So if people are comfortable with jobs, then they can be more comfortable with other kinds of climate policies. And I do think it's politically feasible. They've thought about this carefully, and they're really focusing on the policies that they don't need any Republican cooperation for. They can do it themselves. And then maybe my last point is that, like as a researcher, to me, this, the substance seems like it's a Green New Deal, like what we understand as a Green New Deal, which means climate equals jobs, or that by promoting climate measures help create jobs. But anyway, officially, it's not a Green New Deal. They don't want to call it a Green New Deal because this concept is controversial in the US. But anyway, that's just my personal impression. So I think I'm maybe on time, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving us a very comprehensive view on this Biden's climate policy. Yeah, sounds good. We can expect some good progress in the budget, infrastructure, and regulations. But in the last decades, we observed kind of pendulum of U.S. climate policy. Every after the change of government, it swung between action and inaction. The Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump. I think the lack of comprehensive law on climate change is one of the reasons for such pendulum. So now we have Biden, it's promising, but if he is not pursuing climate law, or there is concern about long-term stability of his initiatives. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a very good question, Tamara-san. And I think, yeah, I have several reasons why I'm actually more optimistic, I think, this time. And I mean, certainly Biden is not proposing a comprehensive law, and maybe this is not really possible to for the US, but I think already there's maybe enough momentum that after 4 years of Biden, I think it will be hard for the pendulum to swing back.
Right.
So for example, I mean, even under President Trump, there were still strong efforts by local governments and businesses and ordinary citizens that really kept the momentum going. And I mean, even at this stage, I mean, market forces are not on the side of fossil fuels.
Right.
And the power companies are already switching because it's cheaper. And also ESG, environment, sustainability, governance, this financial trend, I think also has a lot of momentum. And so now the financial institutions, they're not going to fund fossil fuels anymore. And the fossil fuels, they're having a hard time getting insurance. So, and finally, I think that Biden's climate initiatives will be difficult to reverse. So, I mean, the regulations take a long time to make. The companies know this, and the companies are already going to adjust their actions based on the Biden administration's like proposals. And so the new administration tries to reverse them. It'll take them a long time. By that time, the regulation will basically have been in place like for 6 years or so. So, and they'll be difficult to overturn because they'll have a sound scientific basis and they will follow the procedure carefully. Like, you know, the Trump administration didn't follow these procedures. And also the Biden's whole government approach, you know, each government agency in their daily decisions are going to make pro-climate decisions. So I think after 4 years, and then one more point is that like after this infrastructure investment, after we switch to EVs, after we switch to renewable power, they're not going to switch back.
Okay, that's it.
So I'm actually more optimistic this time. Thanks.
So one key message, U.S. has changed. Not yet. Going to change.
I think so.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mark-san. はい、皆様どうもご清聴ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, everyone, for your kind attention. Now we'd like to open the floor for taking questions. If you have any questions, please use the Zoom Q&A function to submit your questions. Well, actually, we have already received a lot of questions so far. Thank you for that. Some of them are in English, and you can actually write down your question in Japanese as well. So let me pick up some of the questions.
Regarding social cost of carbon. So not national carbon tax, but up to date on the social cost of carbon calculation on the federal procurement. Does this mean creating some shadow price for federal contract? Is it?
That's not my understanding. So the social cost of carbon is used for creating regulations.
Right, yes.
So whenever you create a regulation, you have to analyze the costs and the benefits and show that the benefits are greater than the costs. So the greater the social cost of carbon means the greater the value of the climate benefits. And so it's more like for supporting the scientific support of the regulations.
More procedural things? Or?
It's a scientific basis, an evidence basis for in the U.S. law, the regulations have to be scientifically based.
Okay, good. So next question also, I think regarding 2055 clean energy goal, that means carbon-free energy sector, what specific measure, either through budget or regulatory means, is an administration likely to pursue? I think you already answered, but if you want to add anything else, please. If not, maybe we can skip.
Yeah, I think I don't have anything to
okay.
Yeah, so maybe read the slide carefully, then has more details a little bit.
Yeah. And next question is on the, again, sustainability of these Biden initiatives. You know, Biden hinted that he would be the only serve one term. So what next? So, but also you answered in detail already. So I think this one is skipped. Oh, next one is a bit complicated, so I just skipped this one. We come back later. We have 30 minutes for Q&A, so no, around now 20 minutes on Q&A, so I will come back later. So, yeah, thank you very much for the excellent presentation. How do you expect the domestic legislation and action in the coming 3 months after President Biden summit on this end of April? So what could be the next what is Biden summit in terms of domestic front?
Well, okay, that's a good question. I think in the next 3 months, they're going to spend all of their time working on the infrastructure bill. That will keep them very, very busy. So I think in terms of the climate summit, that's going to relate more to the to international cooperation. And okay, the other point to make about this is that what we're waiting for is the United States' nationally determined contribution.
Yeah.
And the executive order says that that one is going to be finished soon. So they have to issue that before the summit.
Yeah.
So actually we'll get a lot more hints in detail about what the policy is when we see what is the NDC, but the details.
Right.
But yeah, so maybe in 1 week I can tell you a lot more, but not today.
Okay, so please wait for 1 more week. That's his answer. Okay, next question is a bit difficult, might be difficult, but so yeah, he was very impressed by this whole of the government approach taken by the Biden, and also in Japan. Now, under this global warming countermeasure headquarters, this one specific expert council on promoting climate change policy was just established. So there is some expectation Japan also can take the whole of the government approach. So based upon the US experience, do you have any suggestion or recommendation for Japan?
Well, that's a good question. And I should also say that this American approach is very new. In fact, it's only maybe less than 3 months old. So we don't really know exactly how it works yet. But in terms of the form, I do think it's similar to the Japanese approach of having these like headquarters composed of the cabinet members. So I think this is actually the traditional Japanese way of having coordinated policy, right? Is to use this like headquarters approach with the committees. And I don't know, maybe the U.S. can learn from Japan. I don't know.
No. Okay, so let's open the next question. So this one is a bit could be technical, but what about distributed energy system like rooftop solar and batteries? Also, what is the status of a proposed offshore wind energy development? Yeah, so this is a big news regarding this offshore wind energy plan. So, any view on that?
Okay. Regarding distributed energy systems, yeah, I think these are getting popular in the United States. However, I think the major growth in renewable energy is going to come from utility scale renewable energy. And the power companies are already investing in very large scale renewable energy, and it's controlled by the power companies. So both of these are progressing rapidly in the United States. And then regarding the offshore wind, yeah, that has been in the news lately. And the offshore wind, especially in the Atlantic, has been blocked by regulatory red tape and environmental impact assessments. And so it's expected that the Biden administration will expedite these. And so yeah, I do expect that the offshore wind will increase soon.
Okay.
From that.
Okay. So next question is written in Japanese, so I try to translate into Japanese. Not Japanese, in English. Yeah, it is good to learn that in the United States there's some coupling between climate policy and job policy. So these two are just moving hand in hand. So to moving the transition toward net zero, it is obvious because such huge transition affect a lot of impact on the labor and many industries. So it could be natural approach, But he or she is wondering why such discussion have not taken place in Japan. So otherwise, why United States took that kind of approach, that kind of just transition approach first to tackle this one? And what's the implication for Japan?
Okay, that is a very good question. And actually, I mean, personally, I have the same question about the United States, like why this idea wasn't taken up in the United States sooner. And I think President Biden has this idea very strongly. And I think his top advisors now have this idea, but this idea, it's still somehow not very widespread, even in the United States. So I would like to think how to promote in the United States and why in Japan. I mean, actually, I wondered, like all countries, like, why they're not thinking of this.
It could be because the US, of course, producing a lot of coal still. So that's why their focus more on this just transition issue. I remember that Hillary Clinton, she was also for that kind of idea when she ran for the election 5 years ago. So
yeah, I think she had that idea, but somehow she was not able to communicate it clearly. And people didn't really understand it.
I see.
Right, but it's not just the US. I think in Europe, like in Eastern Europe, is the same way. In Poland, that's also a big coal producing country, and China has the same issue. I mean, actually, I know the researchers in your group have been researching it, so maybe even you could comment on it.
Okay, yeah,
but,
next time.
Yeah, I mean, Japan doesn't have coal,
Right.
but still the jobs issue is very important.
Very
in
important.
Japan too, certainly.
Yeah, not only that's kind of industry, also the automobile industry has a huge impact. If we move away from current, system to either EV or hydrogen power. So yeah, that could be really good, very serious. And then as a researcher, you have to tackle on this as well. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to next question. So on oil industry support for carbon tax, I understand this would be quid pro quo situation for limited regulation on the sector. Would this be reason for it contributing to continued production? So kind of, I don't know, disguised regulation. Sorry, I'm not so good at that English, so quid pro quo.
Quid pro quo, yeah, I understand the question. Yes, I agree. That's probably their strategy.
Right,
so
right.
in other words, like now it seems like the regulation is getting serious. And so now, okay, so probably they think, okay, instead of a regulation, now they'll propose a carbon tax. And I do think that's their idea. But I think at this stage, President Biden will not agree to this idea. It's too late. Really, I mean, they should have tried this strategy before. But now President Biden controls the regulatory process, so he doesn't have to accept this deal. So if and also I think President Biden does not want to be the one to propose the carbon tax. So if the Republicans propose the carbon tax, or if the oil companies propose a carbon tax, okay, then he can discuss it. But but President Biden will not be the one to propose it.
Okay.
So he's proposing corporate tax.
Okay. But regarding carbon tax, there's another question. Yeah, yes, that could be, there's some low feasibility of adopting carbon tax or, any carbon pricing mechanism in the United States in the short term. But how about more longer term? Do you have any expectation for adopting this carbon pricing over long term? So without such policy tool, how we can achieve net zero?
Right. Yeah, I think that, in the long term, certainly things could change and it could become more feasible. And, if business realizes that, maybe carbon tax could be better than corporate tax, maybe they'll realize that. But Yeah, I mean, certainly in the climate community, right, we think that the carbon tax is an efficient way to do it. But I think the reality is, like they're calculating, okay, even if the carbon tax is high, but it doesn't mean you have to stop using the fossil fuels. Just you pay a little bit, you pay a higher price for it, but you can still use it. But with regulation, right, there's a potential that okay, you're the fossil fuels will, maybe like restricted or even eliminated.
Right.
So that's yeah. So instead of the carbon tax, the Biden administration, it's going to use regulations. And yeah, so the effect may work differently, but I mean, the regulations could work more quickly or more effectively.
Okay.
Possibly.
Thank you. Yeah, so the time is running out, but I will pick up a few questions. So it seems good prospect of getting approval of this budget, of this infrastructure plan. So, but which part of the budget would be the most controversial between Democrat and Republican? Corporate tax measures, or what do you think?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Well, certainly the corporate tax would be more controversial. But yeah, I mean, actually, I was trying to think, okay, well, if they reduce the size, what are they going to reduce? And I mean, anything they reduce, it's going to reduce the jobs. So I'm actually really wondering, like, what actually they could reduce. Are they going to reduce the home health care? Or even broadband, right? A lot of them complain that, well, broadband is not infrastructure. Well, the rural areas want broadband.
Yeah.
So if they cut broadband, then the rural areas will not get broadband. Okay, I mean, maybe that one doesn't affect the climate so much if they cut broadband.
But that's related to next question. Yeah, you said refer to the broadband. But this question is that in the EU, there is a strong focus on digital technology as a measure for climate mitigation adaptation. Green X digital. So do you see the similar trend in the United States?
I think in the research community, the research community is talking about it, but I did not see it in the infrastructure plan. So I think in the infrastructure plan, broadband means broadband for the rural areas that don't have it. Because the company, the big companies, they think it's too expensive and they don't have so many customers there, so that's why they don't want to. So that's it's not really about green digital. Okay,
thank you very much. And maybe this is the last question, or yeah. So on the expected 50% reduction target, NDC. Yeah, this morning or last night, the Bloomberg reported that one figure is 50% reduction by 2030. So what's your view on this and how this could have impact on current policy?
Well, I think it's actually the opposite. It's not how this target will impact the current policy, but I think they listed up all the policies they think they can implement, and then what reduction amount that is, and then maybe add a little bit of ambition. I think that's probably what it is.
Okay, so
it's the reverse process.
Okay, so much strong impact on the policy process, or policy, for example, policy direction.
I don't think it has an impact on the U.S. policy process. I mean, the U.S. voters, they don't care what the U.S. promised in the negotiations. So it means that the Biden people think that okay, if like all their proposed measures, if they can implement ambitiously, then they think that they can reach 50%. That's what they means. They've decided it's doable based on what they plan to implement.
I see.
I think.
Yeah, you have a bit optimistic view of that. But quite 50% reduction by 2030 is quite ambitious. I think rough estimation is it could be on track to the 1.5 degree emission pathway in terms of. So let's see what happens.
Okay, yeah, maybe in our next year's seminar.
Yeah. So yes, thank you very much. So yeah. まだたくさんご質問。
We have received so many more questions, which we have not been able to address yet. We've addressed probably only half of the questions submitted, but then I have covered those questions in order of submission, but not being able to address all of them. Some of those questions may be posted on the website, maybe. In any case, Mark is going to answer all those questions which have not been addressed yet, and I am hoping that we'll be able to post those questions on the web. Thank you very much. So, the climate change policy of the Biden administration, which is drawing a lot of international attention, we have been able to hear from Mark in-depth insight into the Biden administration's policy. This concludes the Q&A session.
And we have some announcements from IGES. This climate and energy webinar series consists of climate change track for wider audiences and also carbon market track, which focuses people in charge of actual operations in companies and local governments. And for the carbon market, we will have the first one next week. We will hold the first of the carbon market track titled Trends on Task Force on Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets. And we will bring you the offset trends in voluntary carbon markets and actual offset cases by companies inside and outside of Japan that announced net zero, and how investors and non-governmental bodies are seeing the offset. So we like to invite people in charge of actual operations to join. Also, we will hold the second of this climate change track on May 13th. Just as we heard from Mark, on April 22nd and 23rd, Leaders Summit on Climate will be convened by President Biden, and we will explain the movements towards COP26 following this summit. And lastly, we are grateful if you could let us know your comments and opinions to us. Please respond to the questionnaire via the link that will be shown at the end of the program or in the email that will be sent to you later. This webinar series, this dialogue style, is the first for us, and we'd like to improve this, so your comments are very valuable in helping us to make it better. So the time has come, and with this we close today's webinar. Thank you very much for your participation and cooperation. Thank you, Mark.